Phase 4 of the MCU has been a controversial topic of debate ever since it started. Is the MCU failing to capture the same magic that it once had? Or is it setting itself up for more magic and wonder? Well, now that Phase 4 is done, I think we can begin to answer some of these questions. So, before Phase 5 begins, let's discuss some of the reasons why a lot of people don't like the MCU anymore, and try to engage with some of these arguments. Let's get right into it. Now, I think the most pressing matter to talk about when it comes to Phase 4 is MCU fatigue. After the Infinity Saga finished, which had been going on for over a decade, I think it's fair that some people are getting tired of Marvel content, at least Marvel content that's part of this interconnected web of the MCU. We're now closing in on 15 years since Iron Man came out, and perhaps some of the magic of the MCU has been lost. I mean, I'm not personally getting as excited for MCU projects anymore as I used to, but maybe that's also because they're in the rebuilding phase, and once the next Avengers movie comes out, who knows, maybe that MCU rush will come right back to me. However, I think it's okay to acknowledge that the MCU has been going on for a long time, and some people are naturally going to grow tired of it, or simply move on to different things. Although Phase 4 has done some things differently, such as incorporating TV shows and leading into the multiverse, there are still parts that feel very much the same as always. The MCU formula is still present. There's also the factor of there having been released a lot of content in the past couple of years. I mean, seriously, we've been bombarded with superheroes, and other than the possibility of MCU fatigue, it has also led to Marvel cutting corners. Bad CGI was something we began noticing more towards the end of the Infinity Saga, but it has just boiled to the surface in Phase 4, affecting a lot of projects. Now, I'm not a person who requires perfect visual effects all the time. I'd much rather them focus first and foremost on the story and the characters. However, this decline in CGI does allude to a greater trend of Marvel cutting corners, and that perhaps releasing as much content as they're releasing at such a high rate is potentially holding back the quality of these properties. With MCU fatigue kicking in for many fans, I think they could hit two birds with one stone by dialing back the releases just a tad bit. Give more time for people to get excited about a new project while also giving the creators more time to flesh out these projects, and make sure they're of the highest possible quality. Maybe that would help, or maybe it wouldn't. But there's also the issue of there being very little scale in Phase 4. We haven't had any big team-ups yet, except for No Way Home, which felt more like its own separate thing, but it feels like things are being set up for Phases 5 and 6 to then deliver some hopefully sweet payoff. In my opinion, this is fine. They're building up new characters, they're setting up the status quo and a greater conflict, so I'm okay with them taking their time. But I can see how the general audience is losing interest when they mainly care about the big events. And I know that Marvel doesn't want to lose the general audience, they can't survive on just the hardcore fans. However, that was one aspect of the debate surrounding Phase 4's success, and I think it's now relevant to address the MCU argument. Essentially, some people attribute the supposed failures of Phase 4 on it being woke. Now, this argument started during the Infinity Saga with movies like Black Panther and Captain Marvel, but it has really boiled to the top during Phase 4, and the main aspect of these identity politics that they focus on is women in the MCU. The term MCU was brought to popularity by Nerdrotic, but it has since been taken much further. And listen, if your reason for calling it the MCU is solely based on the fact that there are now slightly more female characters and especially female leads in the MCU, and that Kevin Feige even stated that they'd be trying to include more women in the MCU, then fine, because that's true. Perhaps we can agree that this is a good thing. Including more diversity in a previously very male-dominated industry can, in my mind, only be seen as a win. However, I don't think the people who use the phrase MCU agrees with me. That would be a very naive thing to believe, because the people who call the MCU the MCU don't like the inclusion of more women. They think there is a feminist agenda to show that women can do anything a man can, and that men are useless and bad. Like, seriously, this seems like the only thing chuds like to talk about when a new property releases. Wakanda Forever had Shuri as the main character. She-Hulk apparently hates all men. Love and Thunder had a female Thor who took the spotlight. Ms. Marvel was a Muslim girl who has ties to Captain Marvel, and thus Brie Larson. Multiverse of Madness had America Chavez in a significant role. Moon Knight had the Scarlet Scarab save the male hero. Loki had female Loki, who supposedly outdid him in every way. WandaVision of course had Wanda being powerful. Falcon and the Winter Soldier actually mainly talked about racism, but that angered them as well, and of course Hawkeye had Kate Bishop take the spotlight from Clint. Essentially almost every Marvel project in Phase 4 has been subject to these claims of it being female dominated and having an agenda. The only times they didn't do this is when they knew that their fans wouldn't be on board with it, such as with No Way Home. Now, do these claims that the MCU wants to show men as being inferior to women have any backing? Of course not. People love to claim that white men are being oppressed, when white men still make up a large part of the MCU compared to any other social group. I mean, Thor, Peter Parker, Doctor Strange, Bucky Barnes, Clint, the Hulk, and those are just to name a few. And the argument that women are only shown to be better than men, in other words, the bait and switch argument, is also just idiotic. Yes, Kate Bishop wins a lot of fights against bigger opponents, however the opening to the show literally shows us a montage of how she became a skilled fighter, which is more than we ever received for the original Hawkeye. And even then, Kate Bishop still loses a lot of fights. Clint is easily better than her, as he should be, but she's still a badass, with good reasons for being a badass. I also remember people getting angry when Shang-Chi's sister beats him in a fight, in which he was holding back and was trying to talk to her. Ah yes, the film with a male lead who is a badass and saves the day is a bait and switch. I get it now. I also know that some people like to complain that Wanda is better than all other men, when she's literally the bad guy. And this same logic can be used for pretty much every example of the MCU that these people point to. For every emotional claim that men are being shoved to the side in the MCU, there is a rational claim that proves the exact opposite. I really don't understand why everyone is so worried about more women having prominent roles in superhero stories. I think it was tragic that we had to wait 20 movies before we got a female lead, and even then these chuds still acted like it was the end of men, that Marvel was intent on allowing Brie Larson to kill off our marginalized gender. Seriously, complaining this much about the inclusion of women in the MCU makes you look really fucking pathetic. It may feel nice to get recognition within these online echo chambers, but trust me, if you go around spouting these things in the real world, then people are just going to think you're a loser. And listen, I'm not saying that you can't think that the MCU is failing or that it's dying. That's completely fair, and there are many valid arguments you can make. However, I just don't think it's helping you or anyone else to stay so fixated on having to call out wokeness or feminist agendas. There are other reasons for your anger. It's not just because more female superheroes are getting their own properties. And if you really can't look past your biases and you think the MCU is truly lost, then let it go. Trust me, it'll only make you more spiteful to keep engaging with something that you hate. However, enough with the doom and gloom. Why don't we talk about what's actually relevant? Is Phase 4 even good? What's the quality of the many projects we've received? And of course, these takes are 100% my own, so feel free to leave your own down below. However, I personally believe that the quality of Phase 4 projects has been severely underestimated by a lot of people. I'm going to split the properties into 3 categories: great, good/decent, and meh/disappointing. And let me start with the properties that I think were great. My favorite thing that Phase 4 produced was No Way Home, followed closely by Shang-Chi, but I also really liked Moon Knight, Wakanda Forever, and Loki. I'd definitely watch these again. However, there were a lot of properties that I think were decent if not good. Some of the best in this category for me were WandaVision, Ms. Marvel, and Multiverse of Madness, and the rest are things such as Black Widow, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Eternals, and She-Hulk. As for the projects that I thought were meh and disappointing, we have Hawkeye. I really didn't like that finale. And we also have Thor: Love and Thunder and What If. I just wasn't that into it. So overall, when I take a look back at Phase 4, I see a phase that brought me some really good shit and a lot of decent and enjoyable media, with only a few properties that I genuinely didn't like very much, or that disappointed me. However, I am also a big defender of the MCU. I love this shit, and I tend to have a more positive outlook on media than a lot of other people do. So if you don't agree with my list, then that's absolutely fine. I'm sure some of you think that the quality dropped massively in Phase 4, with only a few good properties, and a lot of bad if not horrible movies or TV shows, and that's fair. I'm not going to sit here and claim that there is a right way to analyze Phase 4. There are some properties that have a pretty solid consensus surrounding them, such as No Way Home, Shang-Chi, Loki, and Wakanda Forever. However, there is also a lot of controversial ones where fans have split, such as Moon Knight and Eternals. So yeah, this might seem like a cringe and uninspired sentiment, but most opinions on Phase 4 are valid. If you've grown tired of the MCU and think the quality has dipped along with the passion put into the properties, then that's your opinion, and your opinion is just as worthy to be in this discussion as any other. Where I draw the line, of course, is with the hateful people, the people who make being a Marvel fan less fun, by either feeling the need to make other people feel bad about their opinions, or just generally believe that they know the objective truth about movies, that everyone is just wrong. We don't like gatekeepers, and we especially don't like people who use objectivity to shit on other people's opinions. That's just not very cool. Also, if you don't like Phase 4 because of the inclusion of more women, then get out of here. There's no place for you in the MCU anymore, because the MCU is going to keep getting more woke, as you call it, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you don't like that, and you feel offended as a man, then my best advice is to stop watching the MCU and instead go find something that speaks to you. Clearly, being so angry all the time and also watching content that fuels this anger within you is not very healthy, and I truly want better for you. I hope you manage to do some introspection and ask yourself why you really have such a problem with wokeness. I think there's a really nuanced discussion you can have with yourself there. And I'm not trying to make this sound like I'm better than any of you, trust me, I'm not. I just think statements such as the MCU and the overall focus on wokeness in cinema is problematic, in large part because of the people on top who are spouting this rhetoric. Those being YouTubers who feed off of outrage, and even politicians who use this meaningless word woke to push far-right politics that directly threatens the livelihoods and security of many minorities. The rhetoric we use online can have serious consequences in the real world, so I hope that you have at least listened to me, and that you'll think a little bit about where your opinions come from. This is important for us all to do. Self-reflection is something that I think is very beneficial. However, that's all I had for today. Leave your own thoughts on Phase 4 down below, but other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe and peace out.